Are we ready to sing this morning? Okay.
I'll stand behind this.
You can stand right here. I can do this. You got it? Good morning, everybody. We're going to sing. Hey, Joyce, you ready? You ready for us to sing?
No, I got it.
Okay. You can do that after. You can do that after.
I'm doing it right now. I might be dead.
Okay. All right. Let's sing. Fairest Lord Jesus. Fairest Lord Jesus, ruler of all nature, O thou of God and man the Son, thee will I cherish, thee will I honor, thou my soul's glory, joy, and crown. Fair are the meadows, fair still the woodlands, robed in the blooming garb of spring. Jesus is fairer, Jesus is purer, who makes the woeful heart to sing. Fair is the sunshine, fair still the moonlight, and all the twinkling starry host. Jesus shines brighter, Jesus shines purer than all the angels have can boast. Beautiful Savior, Lord of the nations, Son of God and Son of man, glory and honor, praise, adoration, now and forevermore be thine. Good job, everybody. Good job. I say, so our contest today is a two-parter, and you have to, you get one guess, but it's two names. You get one guess, but there's two names. Two of our staff members share the exact same birthday. Two of our staff members out of these 8 share the exact same birthday. When you think you know who the two are, raise your hand.
We have a hand up already.
Okay, Linda?
Steve and Jane.
No.
I know it's somebody there.
Yolanda?
Is it Steve and Brittany?
It is not.
Is it Steve at all?
I mean, that'll make sense to roll if it's been Steve.
Myrtle. It's that. It is Crystal, but she's not on staff, so we do have the same birthday, but that's not the answer.
She should count that.
Kathy. It's not me and Tyler. We're just related, but we don't have the same birthday. Shirley? It's- No. Okay, I'm going to give you a hint. I'm not a part of the two.
That's a shocker that you would be the
I'm not a part of the two.
I had the birthday list out.
Karen?
Yes. Gail and Celeste.
No. But you are half right. Brenda?
Brittany and Celeste.
No, but you are half right.
Celeste is
You get one guess. Angel?
Brittany and Cameron.
No.
Celeste is the half.
Stephanie and Celeste.
Joyce?
Brittany and Dale.
No.
They're not getting the
Laura?
Celeste and Cameron.
No. Marie?
Celeste and Gail?
No. Yes, ma'am.
Celeste and Tyler.
Yes!
Oh my, these trick questions.
All right. Don't forget, today is the deadline to sign up for the museum trip. We're going to open it up to the rest of the church unless you guys commit today. And then this Thanksgiving dinner, you can pay me the $7 after the Bible study today if you want to go to that as well. All right. We also, for the Thanksgiving dinner, we also have special music that night. It's a special. I can't tell you who it is. All right. So, Donna, you ready? Yeah. All right.
Now, y'all made fun of Steve last week, and I really think he did a good job. I think you need to give Steve a hand. Give Steve a hand. Okay, married 4 times. The local news station was interviewing an 80-year-old lady because she had just got married for the 4th time. The interviewer asked her questions about her life, about how it felt like to be married again at 80 years old, and then about her new husband's occupation. He's a funeral director, she answered. Interesting, the newsman thought. He then asked her if she would mind telling him a little about the first 3 husbands and what they did for a living. She paused for a moment, needing time to reflect on all those years. After a short time, a smile came to her face, and she answered proudly, explaining that she had first married a banker when she was in her 20s, then a circus ringmaster when she was in her 40s, and then a preacher in her 60s, and now in her 80s, she is marrying a funeral director. The interviewer looked at her quite astonished and asked why she had married 4 men with such diverse careers. She smiled and explained, I married 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, and 4 to go. Okay, and I have told this joke before, but I will tell it again, because you might know what it's going to say at the end. Exercise for people over 60. Begin by standing on a comfortable surface where you have plenty of room at each side. With a 5-pound potato bag in each hand, extend your arms straight out from the sides and hold them there as long as you can. Try to reach a full minute and then relax. Each day you'll find that you can hold this position for just a bit longer. After a couple of weeks, move to a 10-pound potato bag, then try a 50-pound potato bag, and eventually try to get where you can lift a 100-pound potato bag in each hand and hold your arms straight for more than a full minute. I'm at this level. After you feel confident in this level, put a potato in each bag. Okay. And this one is, got down on the living room floor last night to do crunches, turned into a 45-minute nap.
I forgot my inspirational.
I thought that was inspirational right there.
Well, you are after me. Okay. Nobody is perfect. We all make mistakes. We say wrong things, we do wrong things. We fall, we get up, we learn, we grow, we move on. We live, and we thank God for always giving us another chance.
I share a quick one that the retired pastor of my community told me yesterday?
Sure.
Who's the most famous musician in the Bible?
Who's the most famous musician? I would say David, but it's probably not.
It was Samson. He brought the house down.
Hey! That's a preacher joke. Yeah, I've mentioned it before, but if you ever need a good preacher joke, just ask Jimmy for one. He's got 20 of them. He's got 20 of them on tap in his brain at any given moment. So that's good. Yeah, I think he's got some books too. That might be helpful for you moving forward too. Before we forget to mention this too, just want to remind y'all what we talked about previously. This is the Hope Team Hope walk for Huntington's disease, as Marie Clay is involved with that. So if you'd like to attend or support it, then this is the information for that. It will be happening on the 7th, Mount Trashmore Park. You can go to the hdsa.org website, Huntington Disease something support or something, hdsa.org, and then you'll find the walk there as well. Or reach out to Marie and she will give you info, and if you'd like to sponsor her, I'm sure she'll be there for it. So appreciate y'all being here today. It was a good song for the day. This is a pretty day to be outside. And I was just thinking through, there are times I've told you about where I'll go to Norfolk Botanical Gardens and just kind of walk through and think through Scripture. And this is one of those songs that would be neat to sing. Every time I go in the garden, I'm always singing in my head, I come to the garden alone, because I'm usually by myself, and if it's a prayer walk. So I sing through that because they have this amazing rose garden too, which is something I never even cared about as a teenage boy hanging out at the beach. But now in my later, I guess, adulthood, if you would, I found myself walking there and appreciating things, slowing down a little bit, appreciating what you see. So these verses are beautiful like that as well. Just being able to take time to notice God's creation, His goodness, surrounding you in His creation is a great thing. Joyce.
Yes, I was in the doctor's office and she had come in and I picked up my phone and I turned it on and you were laying up against the wall with blood coming all out of your body. And then she looked in and I cut it out.
Wow, that's quite a teaser. I know what you're talking about though.
No,
So.
I'm serious. And Gail was standing like this. And
Yeah, so we did. This was probably within my first year here, around Halloween time. I was trying very hard to be fired in my first year at Avalon, and so that was one of the efforts. But we made this little scary movie we used it actually as it was part of a sermon that I did. Of course, most of the crazy stuff I do is some illustration in the sermon. But it was, it's on Facebook. I think Laura Thompson had reposted it. It was a memory from, I guess that would have been 4 years ago. It's not a new thing. It was something back when Jerry and Spencer were on staff. And so it was a fun little video that we made where I'm coming to work and everybody at work is weird in some way. So Gail, this is the only time, it's kind of a collector's item now, it's the only time we've gotten Gail behind a camera. It is impossible to do that. We've suggested it over and over again, but she just doesn't do that. But we got her behind the camera just for that one video, and we made her a weird robot, and Spencer was a weird robot. We even had like special effects, like sparks coming out of him and stuff, and then Jerry was a crazy doctor. I think Jeremy was a zombie. Which he played that really well. Little typecasting there. But it was just a fun little video. So Steve was a bully. He was knocking me over in the hallways. Every time I was running from a robot or the zombie, Steve would come by and knock me over, and that's how I got my boo-boo, which was, So it actually had a plot to it. There was...
saw one part of it.
There, you will laugh, you will cry, you will cut it off quickly too as well. So, If you can find it on Facebook, it's out there. But it's actually an old video we did 4 years ago, which is kind of fun. Well, let's get into Acts today. We are getting towards the end of the book. We're going to be in chapter 23. I think we're about 10 verses in on that. So if you find the spot in the folder, give me the page number so we can get everybody on the same page. 32. And I think I ended on verse 23, verse 10, right? Chapter 23, 10? Okay. So there are 27 chapters in Acts, and these last few chapters will kind of move through fairly rapid fire because a lot of it has to do with Paul traveling to one particular place and a lot of the trials that he'll face between here and then. So there'll be a little bit of repetition with that we'll see. So we'll move through that fairly quickly, which means we'll be done with this book in at least the next 3 weeks, maybe even the next couple weeks. But that's my goal. Even if it stretches out to 4, that will put us, I think, done pretty close to the time where we're going to take a little bit break in around Thanksgiving time, right, Steve? We're taking 2 weeks off in a row, 1 week. 2 in December, that's right. So we're taking the Wednesday right before Thanksgiving off, and then we'll have a couple weeks right around Christmas we'll take off in December. So I think we'll be done with this by Thanksgiving, and then we'll be moving into the life of David, which we'll spend a few months in that. So should be a good study, definitely a fascinating life. And what I like to do whenever I'm studying, especially through Old Testament things, is to make the connections between what's happening in the life of David, and his life very much paralleled Jesus in many ways, which a lot of Old Testament characters' stories, their lives parallel a lot of Jesus' ministry and what he taught. So making those connections with life today and also what we see in the New Testament. Pretty powerful how you can take a book like this written by so many different authors over so much of a period of time, so many different places, and see a unified narrative that all takes a centerpiece on the life of this man who was God in flesh in the 3-year span of time that he spent in public ministry, as well as the meaning of what he accomplished on the cross. Everything ties to that, and it's a masterful story written by the most creative creator. So it's fascinating. And as we've been going through Acts, as I said, Acts is fairly unique in the New Testament because generally you don't have books of history, if you will, in the New Testament. Most of them are letters or teaching from the apostles to different churches there. But the Gospels are historical. And then as far as beyond Jesus' ministry, Acts exists solely as the only historical book of the first century church. So it's vitally important that we study this in detail so it gives us a deeper understanding of our own faith, but also how we practice our faith in community, in the sense of a church. So it's a foundational book for how to do church. Not only what they tell us we should do, but also what they describe that they did. That's the pattern we look after when we try to figure out how to do church in a timeless way. There's some things that change about, how we do church based on culture and style and things like that, but there are also some timeless aspects to how we do church that come from what we're seeing here in the book of Acts. So as we're in this latter part of the book, you have a lot of accounts of, Peter moving around in the early church and things like that. But once we get into Paul's missionary journeys, now we're able to put a foundation on things that we read later in the New Testament. So like when you're going into the book of Corinthians, you can actually look back into Acts and see how the church in Corinth began as Paul's first journey into that area and the people that he interacted with. The book of Philippians, the same thing. You can think of the people that he ran into in Philippi, right? Lydia, the merchant who has the house in London and in New York, remember? Or the girl that had the ability to tell fortunes, a demonic ability that changed everything for that town when she was cured of that. The Roman centurion who was about to kill himself because of the prison break, and he's a part of that church. So when you read the book of Philippians, now you have this context, a framework that you can use throughout the rest of the New Testament. So you have Philippians, Ephesians, another great example of that. Paul spent more times in Ephesus than he did in any of the other towns as far as starting the church and getting them ready for ministry. So that's a really good historical framework to understand why Paul says what he does and teaches on what he teaches in each of the other letters. Romans is a little bit different because Paul never got to the city of Rome in his 3 missionary journeys. I mentioned last week how far it would have been, like an 8-hour plane trip to go from Jerusalem to Rome, I believe, in distance. So there's the distance aspect to it, but also the opportunity never really presented itself for Paul to do that because of all of what was happening in the other towns. And so Romans, like if you were to read Ephesians or Philippians, those letters are written after Paul has established relationships with people there, and he's relating back to things that happened when he was there, things like that. The book of Romans is not like that. It's a book that he wrote prior to going to the city of Rome. And so you can see that even in chapter 1, where he says in verse 10, "In my prayers at all times I pray that now at last by God's will the way may be opened for me to come to you." Paul was intending, desiring, praying that he would be able to go into Rome, but the way never presented itself for him to do so. Now what we're seeing in Paul's life, towards the end of his life, he sees the way into Rome, but it's not the way that you would have expected, right? It's not let me get the boat that's going in that direction and just jump on and get there. He's going there in chains. And so we're seeing how this kind of comes about, and it all goes back to the riot that we saw take place as Paul was in Jerusalem. So you have a riot in Jerusalem, and God providentially, and then also Paul strategically, are arranging things in such a way that he will end up in Rome like he had desired to be all along, but just in a very interesting and different circumstance. So that's the big picture of where we are in Acts. And we are going to be looking into, like I said, halfway through 23. So this is right after Paul had been rescued from the mob who were trying to kill him. He speaks to the mob, if you'll remember, preaches the gospel to them, and then he's brought to the Sanhedrin, and the reason why Paul didn't get imprisoned and then just sentenced right then is because Paul declared that he was a what? A Roman citizen, which meant that he wasn't going to go through the typical, okay, let's flog him, let's give him some time in prison and then let him out. Now they're saying, okay, we can't flog a Roman citizen. It was Roman law that anybody, no matter how high up you were in the military, if you flogged a Roman citizen, you would be subject to flogging yourself if you did that, and it was deemed that it wasn't appropriate for a punishment. So you had the centurion stop the flogging and basically, or keep him from doing that, and then now he's going through this series of trials. The Roman centurion wanted to send the trial first to the Sanhedrin because this issue that they were dealing with in Jerusalem seemed to be a religious one. And this Roman guard is like, soldier is like, I don't know the first thing about what's causing this upheaval in Jerusalem. Maybe they can figure it out among themselves. So they send Paul to the Sanhedrin, and that's where Paul is as he speaks to them about his conversion and his story and why he's doing what he's doing. Okay, so Acts 23, in verse 11, it continues. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage, as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." This is now where Paul is. It could be that Paul is writing the letter to the Romans as he's in house arrest, we'll see in a little bit, anticipating this because he's already heard from God he's going to make it to Rome, that the way is open for him to do it. So then, verse 12, the next morning the Jews formed a conspiracy, bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. Things are escalating. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We've taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we have killed Paul." Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petition the commander to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We are ready to kill him before he gets there. It's getting serious, right? These guys are saying, we are not going to eat until we have accomplished this. 40 people whose sole desire is to kill Paul. And they're setting it up so Paul is traveling, and while he's traveling, they are going to try and kill him on the way. So he gets the word of encouragement that he'll be going to Rome. Why would this be encouraging to Paul? Yeah, so he had been wanting all along to get to Rome. Why would it be important to get to Rome and share the gospel there? That's that is the premier capital of the whole empire in the world, right? So this would be the central point of power in the world in terms of government, military, politics, wealth, all of that. Was there in Rome, right? And Paul had always had that approach. Let me go to the urban center, reach these people in this populated place, and let that message then move into the surrounding areas. So that was Paul's chief desire. We wanted to do that, and now he's getting that reassurance from God that he is going to make it there. I would be encouraged by just the fact that I'll survive the next few days to get to Rome if I were Paul, with as much of a uprising as this, as his ministry's causing. And God is guaranteeing, okay, these guys, basically he's telling Paul already, these guys who have this plot against you are not going to succeed. Okay, so then we read of the conspiracy in the next few verses. So the Jewish zealots were serious, there's a blank, about quickly taking Paul's life. Serious about quickly taking Paul's life. Over 40 men, with the cooperation of the chief priest, present a real threat to Paul's life. So you have even some conspiracy happening within the Sanhedrin, the chief priests, in order to take care of this issue before it gets to all these trials. They'd seen this kind of thing go down before with Jesus, and they don't want it to become another issue, another martyr, another someone who's going to gather his own following. So let's go ahead and take care, even before the trials, let's take care of this guy who's causing all of this upheaval beforehand. So inasmuch as Paul is excited to get to Rome for the message of the gospel, these chief priests and zealots are motivated to stop Paul from getting to Rome, because if Paul is doing what he's doing in Jerusalem, in Judea, and some of these other towns, in Philippi, imagine the damage he could do in Rome if he convinces some of these, Roman military officials of the gospel. And that's absolutely what he's going to try to do as we get into a little deeper of his journey. So then they discover the conspiracy, verses 16 through 22. I'll get there. Okay, but when the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. Okay, so here's a family member, son of Paul's sister, so his nephew, goes into the barracks and tells Paul about what's happening. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner, sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside, and asked, "What is it you want to tell me?" He said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting in ambush for him. They've taken an oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They're ready now, waiting for your consent to their request." The commander dismissed the young man and cautioned him, "Don't tell anyone that you've reported this to me." Okay? So you have this nephew of Paul that discovers a conspiracy, tells Paul. Paul says, "Tell the officials." This is really the only reference to Paul's family in Acts. It's interesting, as much as we know about these apostles, we don't know a whole lot about their family lives. They don't talk much about spouses and things like that. We know a little bit more about Peter. Peter had a spouse, and we know that his mother was healed at one point. while she was sick by Jesus. So you see things like that. Actually, I think it was mother-in-law. So you see things like that. That's a little bit of a connection, but we're assuming Paul never married because he talked about not being married at one point in his letters. But you see there's family that Paul has as well, and they're not too far away from him in this situation. So how did the nephew find out? I didn't even look at that. It just says he heard of the plot. And I think the leading question here is, as God had predicted, you're going to get to Rome. Perhaps God had providentially enabled this nephew to find out. The commander wants to keep his knowledge of the plot secret, so he tells the nephew not to say anything. Because if word gets out to any of these people that they are aware, then they're going to basically change their plan. So this person wants to keep Paul safe. And he's not just... This speaks to the integrity of the Roman guard as well. Because if you think about it, if he'd have just allowed these 40 men to kill Paul, then that may have taken the problem away. Though, the way Rome was, if you lose a prisoner, that could have been a problem for him as well. So, you never really know. But he's motivated to keep Paul safe, and so he tells him to keep it secret. And then it continues, verses 23 and following. Then he called to 2 of his centurions and ordered them, get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. This dude is not playing. Provide mounts for Paul so that he may be taken safely to Governor Felix. That means put him on a horse or he's harder to get to. And so then he writes this letter to Felix. Hold on a second. Let me make sure I'm in the right spot. Okay. He wrote a letter as follows. Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops and rescued him. This is interesting. You'll see how well he kind of builds himself up. This is a politician through and through. And he's speaking to his higher up in politics, and he's like, I saved this man's life. And so maybe that's why Lysias is thinking Paul is kind of his golden ticket to the next step with the governor. So this is how he's writing this letter in this way. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against the man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him. Okay? So here's the letter he sends with Paul ahead of time before Paul testifies about what's going on. All right, so we see some blanks here. The plot is thwarted. That's a fun word. Thwarted. Thwarted. With the protective custody that Lysias provides. And when you do the math, there are, excuse me, emergency services. I know you're saving lives and things, but I'm trying to talk here. Just kidding. 470 soldiers. 470 soldiers total, with all that was described there. And they're moving under the cover of darkness, and Paul is on horseback. So this is about as safe as it gets for Paul to be transported. So you have Lysias paying careful attention to the situation, but he doesn't know what to do with it. On one end, he could very well have said, you know what, I don't have any charges against this man, let's let him go, right? But on the other end, you've got a mob in Jerusalem, and then you've got these 40 guys who are like, we're going to die ourselves before we let Paul live. We're not going to eat or drink anything until he dies. So Lysias knows that there's enough of an upheaval with whatever's going on with this guy that we got to get to the bottom of it. So he has some insight. Okay, I need to run this up the ladder and see if someone can find out what's going on here. So then he sends this letter to Felix, And Felix was the procurator, Procurator, of the imperial province. It's kind of a secretarial position or an administrative position over the province for Rome, for the emperor. The letter doctored up the facts to make Claudius look good. Claudius Lysias is the guy's name. Jewish accusers now had to present their case against Paul. So the letter doctored up the facts, made Claudius look good. He was the hero saving Paul. And now he's putting it onto the Jewish accusers to present the case in a way that makes sense to Rome. Rome doesn't speak in the language of the Jews, but they better figure out. And the Jews have adopted a method of making sure Rome does some of their dirty business. Sanhedrin shouldn't be putting people to death. That was not necessarily in their jurisdiction to do that. But they knew how to play Rome in such a way that the Romans would, by basically just saying, this guy's creating upheaval with our people. So that's what's going on. And then you see Paul being transferred successfully to Caesarea, where he is then imprisoned, and we continue on into 31. So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought him as far as Antipatris. The next day, they let the cavalry go on with him while they returned to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter, asked what province he was from. Learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear your case when your accusers get here." Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace. We'll continue on into the first few verses, 24. 5 days later, the high priest Ananias went down to Caesarea with some of the elders and the lawyer named Tertullus. And they brought their charges against Paul before the governor. Okay, so these are the prosecutors, essentially, the Jewish folks that are coming to make the case against Paul. When Paul was called in, Tertullus presented his case before Felix. "We've enjoyed a long period of peace under you." So hear the strategy here with the Jews and the Romans. "We've enjoyed a long period of peace under you, and your foresight has brought about reforms in this nation. Everywhere and in every way, most excellent Felix, we acknowledge this with profound gratitude. But in order not to weary you further, I would request that you be kind enough to hear us briefly. We found this man to be a troublemaker, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect, and even tried to desecrate the temple, so we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn the truth about all these charges we are bringing against him." The Jews joined in the accusation, asserting that these things were true. All right, so there's the case. Sounds familiar, right? In order to get the Romans upset with anybody, you just say that he's creating riots and upheaval, and he's speaking against established institutions. So they're talking about the temple. Okay. So here's some voices, some blanks. Disappointed over the failure of the conspiracy. These are the Jewish people, disappointed over the failure of the conspiracy. They then go into this trial, and Tertullus, I don't know how you say it, the lawyer for the Jews, uses flattery and heavy accusations. Most excellent Felix. And then Luke is basically giving a summarized account of the case they're making. They had legalese back then just like you would today, where you and I, when we speak and make an agreement, we would say, "Are you in? Are you in? Good, shake hands." But two lawyers get in, you got like 4 pages. You have to sign here, initial here. So it would have been like that back then as well. And so Luke is just getting that account. It continues, verse 10. Verse 10. All right. When the governor motioned for him to speak, Paul replied, "I know that for a number of years you've been a judge over this nation, so I gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago I went up to Jerusalem to worship. My accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple or stirring up a crowd in the synagogues or anywhere else in the city. And they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. However, I admit that I worship the God of our fathers as a follower of the way. which they call a sect. I believe everything that agrees with the law and that is written in the prophets. And I have the same hope in God as these men, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. After an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor and to present offerings. I was ceremonially clean when they found me in the temple courts doing this. There was no crowd with me, nor was I involved in any disturbance. But there are some Jews from the province of Asia who ought to be here before you, bringing charges if they have anything against me. Or these who are here should state what crime they found in me when they stood before the Sanhedrin, unless it was this one thing I shouted as I stood in their presence. It is concerning the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today. So, there's Paul's defense. And then he is using flattery as well to the governor in the very beginning. But he's basically essentially saying there's no proof of the charges. What were the charges? That Paul was causing riots. That he was the one that was whipping the crowd up into this foment of rage against him and the Nazarene sect. And Paul is saying the whole reason I was there was to not cause trouble. I was there to become ceremoniously clean. And there is no harm in being a Christian. So this is a fulfillment of Jesus' promise in Luke 21, verse 15, which says, "For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict." So Paul is speaking in his defense, and he's making a strong defense. And he is not telling he's not being deceptive in any way, right? But be that as it may, what Paul is referring to when he talks about the law and the prophets and the resurrection goes right over the head of most of these Roman officials. So you will see how Felix reacts to this. He's going to need some help. So he calls into the bullpen, if you will, as it continues. We will try to finish this chapter today. Okay, so we are in verse 22, and we'll go all the way down to 27. Then Felix, who was well acquainted with the way, adjourned the proceedings. When Lysias the commander comes, he said, "I will decide your case." He ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but to give him some freedom and permit his friends to take care of his needs. Okay, so this is that house arrest, some freedom. Potentially there is the opportunity for Paul to write letters. He may be writing things like Philippians or even Romans as he's in this situation. Several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was a Jewess. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. As Paul discoursed on the righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and said, "That's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you." At the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe, so he sent for him frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. But because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. 2 years of Paul's life. Think about how well Paul used time when he was on his journeys as a missionary. And here is Paul in this very claustrophobic situation for 2 years. But Paul, being who he is going to make the most of it. And that's why we have 2/3 of the New Testament, because of Paul's time locked down. And God probably was like, if I let you go, you're just going to go everywhere. So let's put you under house arrest for a little bit before you go to Rome. And I give you some time because, Paul is strategically and providentially working through Paul's talent and ability to give us what we have today. So here's some blanks. Paul now has the opportunity to present the gospel to one of the kings of the Gentiles. There's no other way Paul would have been able to sit there and talk to Felix for 2 years than in this way. Felix responds with, I skipped something, didn't I? All right. Felix, so the postponement, of a verdict by Felix. Felix knew about Christianity already. He did this to stall for time and still please the Jews. And the reason is given. The king is familiar with these things. I can speak freely to him. Nope, that's not it. Where is it? Verse 26. Nothing, where were we? I'm sorry, 26. Yes, at the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe, so he sent for frequently and asked for him. So he stalled for time to please the Jews, but also he was thinking if Paul had any resources to buy his way out, he would use them at a time like this. So what that leads to is Paul spending a significant amount of time talking with Felix and presenting the gospel to one of the kings of the Gentiles. And Felix responds with fear and procrastination, which can be the case when we share the gospel, can it not? So people will be unwilling to change until they realize what they gain far outweighs what they lose. Fear and procrastination. So the blanks under 4 are Felix responds to fear and procrastination. People will be unwilling to change until they realize that what they gain far outweighs what they lose. Timing is important, essentially, when it comes to sharing the gospel. And so there are times when people realize the dissatisfaction with their own current state in such a way that they're receptive to the transformation that the gospel can bring. So besides the bribe, Paul was kept in prison because Felix wanted to avoid stirring up unnecessary trouble with the Jews. And he's probably busy writing the letters to the churches that we have. 2 years of house arrest.
Chris,
Yes.
had said that he would have his friends. It never says that anyone ever came to visit him or defend him or anything.
Yes. So this is where it's tremendously fascinating to actually read the last chapters of Paul's letters. These are the parts of Paul's letters where you read through and you're like, okay, he's talking about this guy. I've never even heard of these people before. And even in the end of Romans, where he asked for, I think, Timothy to bring him his cloak and parchments, asking for just creature comforts. This is where you get insight into what that meant for him. So I believe there were people who did visit Paul. Luke doesn't record all of that, but you see pictures of that in how Paul interacts with the churches through his letters. In those last chapters, one of the ways that people knew these were letters from Paul is because there was a constant pattern that Paul used in writing in the New Testament. The first thing he would do is identify himself, identify who he's writing to, which was kind of the standard way of doing letters back then. But Paul would do that. And then towards the end of the letter, he would say, greet this person. And then he would ask for specific things. So you see that in the ends of like Corinthians and Romans. And that gives you insight into what may have happened in Rome as he was in house arrest. He wasn't actually in Rome at this point, but still. So he's in Caesarea. So one more blank before we're done. So you have Felix. He kind of runs out of time as a politician. And then you have Festus kind of rising to his position. And the Jews complained to Nero that Festus had been too harsh on them. So he was removed and exiled to Gaul, where he eventually died. That might be a typo. That should be probably Felix. I'll have to double check that. So I'll look into that, make sure that's correct. But you have then Festus coming in. Now Felix had a connection with the Jewish people. He had a little bit of an understanding of what Paul talked about. Why? Because his wife, Drusilla, was Jewish, right? So he knew about the Nazarene sect. He knew about the way. He knew a little bit about the teachings of Christ. And then Paul is trying to use that as a way to reach him. But as far as we can tell, never does. And if it's actually Felix who was the one who was too harsh, I don't know. But if it's Festus, then this would be later in Festus's rule. Festus is way more of a politician than even Felix was. So we'll look into that more next week.
So we're stopping here.
We'll stop here. Yes, we'll stop at the end of chapter 24. And then we'll pick it up on 25 and try to get through 25 and 26 next week. And then I will... Did I say 27 chapters? I think it's 20. It's actually 28. Anyways. So it may actually end up being 3 weeks from now that we're done. Yes. Okie doke. Appreciate your focus and attention. These are the finer points of Acts that I think can give you a lot more picture for other things you see in the New Testament. Yeah. All right, so we'll talk about a couple of prayer things to be praying for this week, and give you a chance to mention stuff if we're not aware of it yet. Mentioning also, we have a few birthdays this week. We have Billy Prock tomorrow's turning 94, and then Barbara Simmons shares her birthday as well, and Mila Kutrell is on Saturday. So those birthdays are coming up. And then we have, as far as prayer is concerned, we have Floyd, who's still recovering. He's home.